Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and we are on the next part of our first-person shooter tutorial. So, last week I made the video about Wolf Den Casino and all that stuff, and I didn't have the tutorial ready, and I didn't want it to feel rushed, so that's kind of why I'm a little late with this. And originally I was going to kind of go into a bit of math, because basically what we're doing is we're going to be extending the death animation. So before, the way we had it set up is when your character dies, we just completely deactivated the object, and after that happened, you couldn't really go anywhere. It just, your object was done, you had to hit stop and hit play again to continue playing. This time what we're going to do is we're going to just cause a character or a camera animation. And once it finishes, you get attacked by the troll face and the Comic Sans. And if you hit space, the level reloads and you can continue playing. Alright. Originally I was going to go into the nth curve path script that I created for this. But it's kind of hard to explain the math behind it in a short period of time. There's just too much to go through, and I've already tried recording this tutorial like twice, and it was just I was just jumbling all over my own words, and it wasn't really. I would have ended up confusing you more trying to explain it than I would just using it in the script or in the tutorial. So I'm not going to go over the script. I'm just going to include it in the description. But yeah, basically what the nth curve path script does is it creates a Bezier curve that you can attach as many points as you want to it, and it will kind of solve the path. And yeah, so you can just enter a point between 0 and 1, and it'll get you a point on that path depending on what value you enter. Alright, so instead what we're just going to do is we're going to set up our death camera animation script, and we're going to modify our base entity script a little bit to include an event for when the character dies. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to open up our base entity script. Alright, and once that opens up, alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to add a new variable, and the variable is going to be an action. Alright, so it's going to be a public. An action is under the system library, so system.action, and it's going to be called onDeath. Alright, what an action is, it's a delegate, or just a pointer to a function that returns nothing and takes no parameters. Alright, so we can attach functions or methods that are void with no parameters to the onDeath delegate, and every time we call onDeath, it'll call all of the functions that are attached to it. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to move down to our take damage method, and when the current health is less than or equal to 0, what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of logging you died and setting the active to false, we're going to check if onDeath is null, and if it's not null, we're going to call it. Alright, so onDeath is going to default to null, but as soon as we attach or point a function to it, it'll represent that function or whatever list of functions it has to go through. Alright, so we're going to remove this, and we're going to go if onDeath is not equal to null, onDeath, and we're going to call it like a method. Alright, so, and that's all we have to do for base entity. Alright, we're just creating our public delegate that we can attach methods to, and we're just going to call it during our onDeath event. Alright. Now we're going to create a brand new script, and it's going to be our death animation for our camera. Alright, so what we're going to do is in my scripts, we'll create a new C# script, and we will call it death camera. Sure. Alright, and what we want to do is we want to drag it onto our first person character. Alright, so I'm going to bring back my tutorial first person character, and we're going to select our camera, and we're going to drag our death camera onto the first person camera. Alright, and let's open it up and start filling it out. Alright, let's get rid of this. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is create a reference to hold a base entity, which is going to be our character. Alright, so we'll just go public, base entity, main player. Alright, and we're in the editor, we're just going to drag the main player onto that parameter. Alright, next we're going to have our nth curve path, and we're going to use this as the path for the camera to rotate around or move on when the character dies. So we'll just call it camera path. We're going to go with a public simple rotator, and this is basically just so we can deactivate the script once a character dies, because we want to deactivate certain scripts when the character dies, like the ones that are moving the camera around, because when the character dies, we want the camera to move along the path and focus on the character. But if we leave our simple rotator script on, as we move the mouse around, it's going to be fighting with the camera as it's trying to focus on the player. So we're just going to have a reference of it, and we're going to deactivate it when the player dies. Alright, so we'll just call it rotator script. Alright, and public game object, child object. Alright, and what child object is for is if we go back in Unity, we'll see that we have a weapon position underneath the camera, because that's what we use to move the weapon around based on the camera rotation. Alright, so we're just going to hold a reference to the weapon position. That way we can completely deactivate it, and it's not going to be it's not going to follow the camera around while it's trying to focus on the player. It's just going to be gone. Alright, now we're going to go with a float, and this is going to be called camera animation speed, and we're going to change the speed of the camera movement depending on whatever this variable is. So if we give it a value of 3, we mean that it's going to take 3 seconds to complete the animation. Alright, and we're going to go with a private variable this time, and it's going to be a Boolean. And basically what this one's going to be doing is checking to see if we can actually show the GUI or not. You know, that horrifying death page that had my face and Comic Sans, the two-hit combo, we're basically going to be checking to see if we can actually show that or not. So we'll just call it show GUI equals false, because we don't want to show it right off the bat. And we're going to create another Boolean, and it's going to be called can reload level, because we don't want the player to reload the level immediately after the character animation starts going, or immediately after the fade starts coming in. We want to wait until the animation is finished and the death screen is completely faded in, and then we're going to check and see if the player wants to reload the level. Alright, so we're going to set that to false as well. We're going to create a public texture, and that is going to have our death texture, or the Comic Sans combo. And we're going to have a private color, and it's going to be called GUI color. And we're just going to default it to white. we don't want that new there. Alright, and this is basically what controls the fade in. What we're going to be doing is setting the alpha of GUI color from 0 to 1, and as it goes from 0 to 1, it's going to fade in. Right? So first thing we're going to do now is start with our start method. So void start, and here is where we're going to attach a method to the onDef delegate that we just put into our base entity. Right? So we're going to get our main player, and we're going to grab its onDef delegate, and we're going to use the += command and a function called showDefAnimation. Alright, and that's going to be a function that we're going to be making next. Alright, so we'll just fill it out real quick to get rid of the error. Void showDefAnimation, and we'll just leave it empty for now. Alright, now what I want to point out here is that when you're attaching a method to a delegate, you don't want to use these parentheses. Alright, because when you're using the parentheses, that means that you're actually calling the method. But when you just point to, or when you're trying to point to the method, you just use the name of it. Alright, so what are we going to put in our showDef animation? We're going to be starting a coroutine, and then we're going to remove the event. Alright, that way it's not called again on accident. Alright, so go main player dot onDef - showDefAnimation. Alright, and that'll remove it. And then we'll start coroutine, move through animation. Alright, and that'll be a coroutine that we're going to create next. Alright, so we're going to create our coroutine now. So remember, it's IEnumerator and move through animation. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the parent of our camera to null. Alright, that way the camera is moving independently of the character, because when the character dies, we might want we'll add a force to it so it'll fall over, and we don't want the camera to follow along with the player. We want it to be completely separate and go through the animation. Alright, we'll go with main player renderer dot enabled equals true. Alright, so if we go back into the scene, we'll notice that we don't have the character isn't visible. Alright, that's because the renderer is not enabled. As soon as we enable it, all of a sudden the capsule is visible again. Alright, so while we're playing, we don't want it to be visible, because then it looks kind of weird with part of a capsule going in front of the camera. But when the character dies, we do want it to be visible. That way you can actually see the body fall over. Alright. So main player dot rigid body dot constraints equals rigid body constraints dot none. Alright, so what this does is it completely removes the constraints from the rigid body. If we go back in, we'll see that the restraints are on the X and Y rotation, and this allows the player to only move left and right. Alright, as soon as we remove those constraints, we can add a force to it and the player can topple over, which is what we want if the player is dead. Alright, now we're going to add a force to the player. So main player dot rigid body dot add force, and we'll just add a force randomly, basically. So random dot on unit sphere times 10. Why not? Alright, and we're going to set the camera path dot transform dot parent equals null. Alright, so what we're going to do with the camera path is we're going to have it follow around the player as well, along with the camera. And then when the death animation happens, both the camera and the path are going to be taken outside of the, they're going to be unchilded of the main player and just floating in the world. That way they don't move around with the player anymore. And here we're going to disable our rotator script. We are going to deactivate the child object. That's set active, false. And we're going to create a float called current time, and we're going to set it to 0. And we're going to create another one called delta time, and we're going to set it to 1 divided by our camera animation speed. Alright, and what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to increase current time by a value that will cause it to the animation to last 3 seconds or whatever we set camera animation speed to. Alright, we're going to go into a while loop, and while our current time is less than 1, we're going to yield return null, since we're in a coroutine, and that's going to wait till the next frame. We're going to increase current time by time.delta time, so however long it took to complete the frame, times our delta time, which is basically going to slow it down or speed it up depending on whatever the camera animation speed is. Alright, so after 1 second, if we didn't have delta time here, if we were just increasing it by delta time, or time.delta time, after 1 second, current time would equal 1. Alright, so since we're dividing 1 by 3, and we're multiplying that by time.delta time, it's going to take 3 seconds to make current time equal 1. Okay? And we're going to move the position of our transform is equal to camera path dot get point at time current time. Alright, so get point at time is a method in our nth curve path, and it'll return a point on the path based on whatever value between 0 and 1 you give it. Alright, and we're going to make our transform look at the main player. Alright, so we're going to make it look at its transform. Then what we're going to do is we're going to wait, say, half a second. So yield return new wait for seconds, 0.5. And then we're going to start a new coroutine. And that's going to be called fade in GUI. Alright, and that's going to be the next method that we fill in. Alright, so let's create that coroutine right now. Private IEnumerator, fade in GUI, and first thing we're going to do is we're going to set GUI color, the alpha, to 0. Alright, that way it's completely invisible. And we're going to set our our show GUI to true, because we want to start showing our GUI now. Alright, so while GUI color dot alpha is less than 1, alright, so while it's not completely opaque, just like before, we're going to yield return null. We're going to increase GUI colors alpha by time.delta time, and that's it. Alright, so doing this means that it's going to fade in over 1 second, and then we're going to set can reload level to true, right? Because now it's faded in completely, so we can let the player reload the level. Right? Now, one other thing I want to do. The main player has other scripts attached to it for moving around and that sort of thing. So we want to disable those scripts as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a method that will take any game object and will deactivate all mono behaviors on it. Alright, so that way we can just pass a game object into it, and every single mono behavior on it that we created that might be running will be completely deactivated. So we're going to go with void deactivate mono behaviors, and we'll take a game object and we'll just call it obj. Right? And what we're going to do is we're going to create a for each statement, and for each mono behavior, and we'll just call it behavior, in obj.getComponents in children mono behavior. Right, so for every single mono behavior in all of the mono behaviors attached to our game object being passed in or its children, we're just going to turn them off. So behavior.enabled equals false. Alright, and we're just going to apply that to the main player. Alright, so let's go with deactivate mono behaviors before we do anything. Main player.gameObject, and there we go. Alright, so what we're going to do for the move through animation script, we're going to set the parent to null, deactivate all mono behaviors on the game object. We're going to reactivate the renderer on the main player, get rid of all constraints, add a force to it, set the camera path's parent to null, so it's floating in the world, deactivate our rotator script on the camera so we're not moving around with the mouse, get rid of the weapon, and we're going to move along the path over time, wait for a little bit, fade in our GUI. Alright, so now we're going to do our onGUI function. Alright, so we're not going to do anything unless the GUI is being shown. So if show GUI, and if show a GUI is true, GUI.color is equal to GUI color. Right? That way we can fade it in or out. GUI.draw texture, and we'll create a new rect, and we'll just fill the entire screen. So 0, 0, screen.width, screen.height. Alright, start at the top corner and move all the way to the left, or bottom corner. Alright, and we're going to pass in our death texture. What do we call that? Called a death texture. Alright. Alright. Now that the show a GUI is true, we want to make sure the player can actually reload the level before we let them. Alright, so if can reload level, if event.current.type is equal to event type dot key up application.load level. Alright, so we're going to tell Unity to load a level, and we're just going to reload the same one we're in. So that to get that, we go application.loaded level. Alright, so it's just going to reload the level that we're currently in. Alright, so if we go back in, there's no errors, which is great. We have our death camera attached, so we can start linking things together. Alright, so our main player is our first person character, so we'll drag that onto main player. Rotator script is right here, so we'll drag that on there. child object is weapon position, so we'll drag that under child object, and my death screen will be included in the description, and I just have that under textures, so we'll drag that there. And we need to create our nth curve path. So I'm going to show you how to do that really quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new game object. So I'm going to hit Control Shift and N, and we'll call it camera path. Alright, where'd it go? Alright, what I'm going to do with camera path is I'm going to drag it right under head joint. That way it's alongside the camera path, or alongside the camera. Alright, I'm just going to reset the transform. Alright, now I'm going to drag our nth curve path onto camera path. Now the way nth curve path works is that the starting point is going to be the transform that the nth curve path is attached to, and then all the points will be the remaining points underneath it. Alright, so I'm going to create a brand new game object again and drag it underneath camera path. That way things are consistent and it's all organized, and we'll call it point 2 since it's the second point. Alright, if we drag it under points, let's say we try and drag it up. Oh, no, that's not what I want to do. Drag point 2 up. You see a little line coming up, and we'll get to that in a second. Now I'm going to duplicate point 2 again. So Control D, and we'll call it point 3. Now I'm going to drag point 3 under points. And now you see the line is connected. And if we drag point 3 around, you'll see it's actually a curved path. Alright, so if we keep doing this, make a couple points. So point 4, point 5, point 6. We drag all of these under our points. We start moving them around. Suddenly we have a path that is, a spiral or whatever it is that you want to create with it. Alright, so let's kind of fiddle around, make a path that looks okay. Now to display the path, we're using gizmos within Unity, and I'll go over those later, but basically what they allow you to do is kind of visualize things within the editor, just to kind of for debug reasons. Alright, and the nth curve path script that I'm giving to you also has some parameters for how it's visualized, so for how smooth you want the path to look in the editor, or how big you want the cube sizes to be, if you want it to be like rectangles or whatever. Alright, and we're going to drag our camera path onto the death camera. Alright, so now that everything's linked up, when you die in a fire, the player should go through a death animation now, instead of just deactivating the game object. Alright, so let's test it out. Let's go skip along and jump in the fire. And we'll wait for the health to run out.
Stop it!
As your character completes.
Stop
and
it!
Now we have our death animation. And our horrifying death screen. If we hit spacebar, the level should be reloaded. Alright, so like I said,
Ow! Stop it!
the character dies, the event is called.
Stop it!
And as you can see, our camera is moving along our path. The player's rigid body, the constraints removed, and a force was added to it, so it just fell over. And once we got to the end, our character animation plays, or not a character, our GUI death screen fades in, and we can hit space, and the level's reloaded. Oh yeah! Now we can actually have a somewhat complete single-player boring game. Alright, so now that we have an actual loop, I think I'm going to start going over AI and that sort of thing. Getting some some actual enemies to shoot back at you, because it's great and all. We have an actual game loop, weapons and pickups. Now we just need enemies to start shooting at you and making the game interesting. Alright, so that's all for now, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you guys next time. If you like these tutorials, remember to hit that like button to let me know. Alright, bye-bye!